Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Data Show. I'm your host, Chris Greco. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to be talking data, however you want to phrase it. Today, we're going to talk about is regression. And this is really important from the standpoint of being able to forecast. And what we're going to do today is talk about regression. We're going to talk about some media hype that's been going on, having to do with some stories lately, and how to get data from from different sources. Actually, from one source. We're going to go to the Centers for Disease Control today and get some data. And then we're going to talk about how regression is really kind of a fallacy, and how what happens is that people use straight line regression to show things are getting worse quickly. Because I mean that's all that's in the political realm. And this is kind of important to point out. In the political realm, it's very important to generate a lot of emotion in a little bit of time. And to do that, you show somebody a chart that shows rising whatever temperatures, deaths from COVID, all the different things that go along there. And what happens is the faster you see it rising, the more emotionally more emotional buy-in that you have on that. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and fallacy of using the straight line regression. We'll bring up some examples, bring up some areas, some data areas, all these different things. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is a regression line? Because that's what people talk about. And when you see it, you'll see a regression line. You'll see lines, and all of a sudden be like, oh my gosh, look, if this is happening in 2010, by 2030, we're all going to be basically a cinder, that type of thing. So it's that type of emotion that the media wants to generate. And they do it. They do a great job. I'll tell you, these are professional hype generators. I mean, that's what they do, because that's what sells. That's what sells media. That's what sells advertisers. That's what sells, people clicking on the stories. Is a good solid headline that turns people into emotional engines, and that's what you want, an emotional engine to get, to do those types of things. So that's what we're going to talk about. So simply put, a regression line is a what they call a best fit line that cuts the data in half. If you're on a scatter chart and see a bunch of dots, if you put a line where the same amount of dots are on one side of the line as on the other side of the line, then that is considered to be best fit line. And that's as simple as that. And it's really interesting how there are calculations and there are formulas and all those other things, but that's basically what a best fit line does. Puts as many on one side of the line, as many points on one side of the line as on the other side of the line. And that's a regression line. That's a simple regression line. So regression is based on the mean of the data, the average. What's interesting is mean is not a robust measure for the center of that data. In other words, it can be skewed by values either high or low. And you can see that if you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 5,000. If you have the following values, 1, 2, 3, 5,000, your mean is going to be much greater than it's going to be if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So all of a sudden your mean is huge, but that doesn't mean that's the average. But what happens is that high value just pulled everything to the right, pulled it. So it can be a high or low. In essence, the regression is based on the center, and the mean is the center of the data. The mean is not robust. It can be skewed. So basically, basing the regression on the mean, which you do, makes the regression suspicious at best. And predictions based on straight line regression, by logical conclusion, are also suspicious, because regression is based on mean. Mean is not robust. Can be skewed. So therefore, regression can be skewed. And that's what happens. And basically what happens is all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? So I'm going to show you some of this today. Example, for instance, heights of people, regression. If two people have a child, then that child will have some of the basic characteristics of the parents. That's a fact. It's DNA. It's just that's what happens. So if two people over 6 feet tall have a child, there is a distinct possibility that child is going to be more than 6 feet tall. Now, if that child ends up married to another child who is also above 6 feet tall, right? then all of a sudden you're going to have, you know, if they're let's say they're 6'6", their child could be at a very, very high probability of being above 6'6". So this has to stop somewhere along the line, because otherwise you'd have 8, 9 feet kids, children, as a matter of course, matter of routine. So what happens is after a while, it regresses back to the mean. It regresses back to the mean. So and regressing to the mean in this case would be the average height of men and women. I think the average height of a man is 5'10", and a woman I think is 5'6" or 5'7". So basically, what would happen is you'd have a child that would go back to that. Now, in a family of above 6 footers, that child would be basically a small child, but in actuality, it would be average height. So that's what happens. That's what regression signifies, is that you're regressing. The line regresses to the mean. It regresses to the mean. Hence, that best fit line is basically the average of the dots on either side of that line. And that's basically what you have a kind of an average line type thing. So the same thing happens to all the data. So let's say you went to a college and tuition was $2,500 a year. Your child went to the same college 30 years later, and the cost of tuition was $15,000 a year. By having those 2 points, you can actually make a line to see what that cost might be 30 years after your child's graduation. Now, this is an invalid sample because there's only 2 points. You can calculate the approximate cost using the forecast capability of the Excel software, and we'll do that right now. So basically, what happens is this is how you do it. So you go to sheet 1. This is your cost. At year 1, which is the year that we're talking about, is $2,500. Year 2, which is 30 years later, is $15,000. So what happens is you chart that, and here's the 2 charts, and then you have a regression line that basically goes like this. Now, what happens is you can actually, interestingly enough, you can take this and you can take a look at this and see exactly what's going on. And you can see this through what they call the forecast. So what I did was I actually did a forecast sheet, and you can do a forecast sheet here. You see where it says data. You go back to the data here, right? And you do what they call a forecast sheet. And what the forecast sheet will do is when you hit this, it will come up and it will show you what the forecast is. So the forecast now is the 4th time, so 30 years in the future. Well, this is 30 years in the future, and this is 30 years in the future. So in my case, what I did was I created that, and I'm going to show you when it created it, it gave you a table, and that table shows the forecast. You have 1 and 2 already done. Here's your forecast. Your forecast is 27,500. So in 30 years past that 30 years that your child went to school, it's going to cost about 27,500. 30 years beyond that's going to be 40,000. 30 years before that's going to be 52,000, using a straight line, basically straight line regression forecast. And interestingly enough, this doesn't incorporate any types of changes, because when you talk about changes, you bring this up, having 2 points, and you do the forecast capability Excel software, the approximate cost would be about $28,000. Now, is this valid? No, the sampling is too small, and because it's a straight line. You haven't incorporated change. You have not incorporated change. So what about change? So change occurs throughout our lives. That's absolute fact. Some of the change is good, some is bad. Now, Thomas Bayes, who was a theologian, back a long time ago, he decided that basically he was going to try to prove that miracles exist. And the way to do that was to try to point out all the different factors that have to go along with what the probabilities has to do. Because you just had plain probabilities, and then you had what they call Bayesian probabilities. And it works very well. Now, I've explained this in the past, but I think it's important to understand what we're talking about here. Sorry about this. So basically Bayesian. So we're going to talk about Bayesian factors. All right, let's say you are flipping a coin. So you flip a coin, you flip a coin, you flip a coin, you flip a coin. According to frequentist possibilities, in other words, you do it 5,000 times, you should end up 50-50. 50 heads, 50 50% heads, 50% tails. But Bayes would say, well, it all depends. It all depends. Let's say that you flip it, let's say 5,000 times, you flip it 1,000 times with your right hand, 1,000 times with your left hand. You flip it so that it spins twice the amount of time, in the air. You let it land on a table, you let it land on your hand. All these different things affect the probability of what goes on. And this is something that in real life needs to be incorporated in all probabilities and in all situations. And what we'll talk about next time, we'll talk about the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome talks about, it's been 50 years since they did a book about population, and the fact that this is according to their book, which was in the 1970s, about now we should be pretty much extinct. I mean, the population would have grown so much that we can't feed ourselves, do whatever. And as you can see, most of us are here. Everything's okay. I mean, not everything's okay, but everything is not. We're not on the verge of extinction, supposedly. So that's what happens. And so you have to do that in every probability calculation. What type of changes would affect tuition? Well, I'll let you come up with those, but just the economic changes, just inflation itself would radically change the outcome of that very, very minimalist type chart that I presented. So that's the thing that happens there. So what about weight? People talk about weighting the data, and everyone talks about this as kind of a passing thing, but weighting the data is extremely important. The idea of weighting is to basically get the values so that you can compare apples to apples. So let's say population. Let's bring up an example about population. So the relative weight of the values. Let's say 300 people have a disease in the US, not age specific, and 500 people in China are suffering from the same disease. Comparing numbers would not be valid. You'd say, there's more people in China that are suffering from this disease than in the United States. Well, no, that's wrong. Each number would have to be divided by the respective populations in order to compare it by standard. Now, I'm being very general here. Let's say that the diseases only hit those people over 60. Well, then that's a whole different population arena that we'd have to look up and have to know. So basically, you divide the population, we give you something like 300 divided by 340 million, which is the United States population, compared to 500 over 1.4 billion, which is the Chinese population. So the numbers would be 0.00000. Well, anyways, you'd have 7 zeros and then an 8, and that's the US. And then China would have 7 zeros and a 3. Well, you have to count the zeros, but basically the density of the disease would be in favor of the US, not China. 8 is greater than 3 with the same number of zeros before it. So basically you have a higher density, a higher proportion of people that are suffering from the disease in the United States than in China. This is where everything gets lost. This is where all of a sudden you're comparing apples against whatever, apples against tomatoes, that's actually tomato, apples against cucumbers. You're not even the same fruit category. Right. So you have to understand that that's what weighting does. And that's what Bayesian was saying is, look, there's differences here, and those differences make a big difference. Okay. So how does this relate to data? Basically, without weighting, the data would only be valid when compared to a standard. Remember, we talk about standard deviation. And everyone talks about, because what that does, what standard deviation does, is it can take two data sets that are completely different. And by using the standard deviation, you can actually compare one data set against another data set, because that standard deviation is a standard deviation. Hence, that's why they call it standard deviation. So if the population changes, as it will, one way or another, thank you, Bayes, then the relative probability changes. Okay, so to state that something is increasing without this standard is not fully correct. I hate to say it's false. It's probably it's misleading. I think it's misrepresenting. I think it's misleading, since it's not comparing two similar things, right? The data may be excellent, but the analysis may be wanting because of that lack of objectivity in trying to compare two things. The one comparison shows in your favor that, hey, look, this is what I've been talking about. Look at this. This is, look at this data right here. This shows that this is, but that's not the way to do things. So perspectives may be skewed to gain emotion. Sorry, as is the motive behind media, talk shows, news programs, all these different things. They don't want to be objective. And you can sit back, and I'm not saying my show gets any type of big audience or international audience or whatever else, because I'll probably get some smack on talk shows. But the bottom line is they're not objective. Talk shows are not objective. They have an agenda, folks. So do the news programs. The news programs have an agenda. The agenda is, number one, make revenue. You got to make revenue. In order to make revenue, what you have to do is you have to bring in the audience. To bring in the audience, you have to have something provocative. You have to have something controversial. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do what needs to be done. So that's what that is. So let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk about something controversial. We'll show you. I'm going to show you this in Excel, but this is from Center of Disease Control, CDC.gov, what they call their Wonder program. In fact, you can say CDC Wonder in your Google, and it'll come up with this. Now you can set whatever you want in these. What I did was I set the number of deaths by year between 15 and 19-year-olds as a result of gun assaults. Now, a lot of people have been talking about gun violence, but the data that they've been pulling has been from age 1 to 19, and anything having to do with guns, anything, accidental discharge, law enforcement, anything having to do with that, they've been including in those data. So what I did was I just went straight gun assaults, and this is what I came up with. Now you can see you can see that it goes kind of up, then down, then back up, and then it just pops up right here. It pops up right here to 2020. Now, take a look at this. If you take a look at this from a single line regression, you're going to end up with this. And what's going to happen is this thing's going to raise. It's going to go up. Even though without this point, it may just be straight line right here. But the bottom line is it looks like it's going right up. And the reason is because that point right here, 2020, which is in the midst of the pandemic, and this is only 15 to 19-year-olds, 15 to 19-year-olds. I wanted to get down to basically, up in the high school range. And this is what this shows. And this, to tell the truth, is the majority, 2,400, is the majority of people that have been killed by gun violence. Well, not gun violence, gun assaults. Assault with a weapon. Could be a rifle, could be a pistol, whatever it is. And this is what you need to do. You can sit there and say, Chris, my gosh, even one death from a gun it's not acceptable. That's not acceptable in any way, shape, or form, as far as I'm concerned. But this is data, and this is the data show. So I'm just going over the data. If you want to go over it yourself, please, by all means, go to CDC Wonder. You can set your own parameters, and you can do whatever you want from that standpoint. So I think this is important to be able to bring up, because I think it's something that we need to have. So what I did was I took some of this data, and I think this is kind of cool. I took the data here, and what I did was I tried to get it so that let me see if I can. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pound this down here. There you go. And then what's going to happen is we're going to bring this up. So this is the single line regression. But let's take a look at this. So this is the deaths from 1990 to 2020, having to do with anything having to do with guns, not assaults, anything having to do with guns. And this is what I came up with here. So what I did was I did a forecast sheet on this, and this is what I came up with. This is just population. You can see that the population of individuals from 1 to 19 are actually going to go down. This is the forecast sheet all the way through 2026. So this is done by Excel. It's very simple. It's called exponential time series, which is actually better then a straight regression line, straight line regression. So this is what they have there. So also what I did was I thought, well, I'll just take this. Now this right here is 1 to 19, all the gun aspects and the number of deaths. So here we have 3,500 here, and then it goes down, up, down, and then back up again. And then this is the 2021 where it's like about 4,200, 4,291. And again, you can see that 2,500 that I presented there from the 15 to 19 is more than the total from 4,291. Also, it's only gun assaults. So you can see here, it drops like a rock, and it drops like a rock right back to here. Why is that? Why did it drop back here? Well, folks, what I've been talking about here, when we talk about regression, we talk about trying to get back to that basic mean. So if not, this is exponential, so it's a little bit better than single line regression. But the bottom line is, you can see it drops almost right back to the level it was in 2019, and then kind of goes straight line from there. So that's how that's done, and then you sit back and you go, okay, that's kind of cool. Yes, it is, because basically now you have a 95% confidence level on either side. So so it can go from 4219 all the way down to 2734. So somewhere in there, that's going to be, if you did it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, this this forecast, did it a million times, you'd get somewhere in there that's going to be your range. So it could go way down here to the level of like 2014, 2015, or it could go as high as here, which is basically higher than 2020. But this is the center point of that area. So that's what we're talking about, and this is really nice actually, because what this does is this kind of gives you a really nice look at at what you're talking about here. So this is all numbers here. These are the forecasts, upper and lower. This gets all the forecast areas. So it's really a good. I mean, Excel does it right, and this is what the situation is. So if you went back, let's say you go back to sheet number 3, and you can see that this is all interesting. But let's say that I were to get rid of this. Let's say I were to dump off 2020. So all of a sudden now I'm here, right? I'm here at this level. Well, what would have been the forecast? Let's say I want to forecast this out, but I don't want to include 2020 on this. If I would have forecast this out, what would it look like? Guess what? It comes down again, and this is where it was. If nothing changes. Now remember, 2020, you're in the absolute midst of this pandemic. So that's what's happening here. So what I'm going to do now is, what I want to bring up is, I'd like to bring up just real quick some what it looks like, what the CDC looks like. So what I did was up, and we're going to take, whoops, didn't want that. We're going to take this, and we're going to take a look at this from the standpoint of not just who we are, but take a look at it from a standpoint of where we, the idea that we have this. So what I have is I have, this is the actual deaths by year from the assault, right? But this shows you the CDC wonder, and then what I set everything at. So this is what I set everything at from this standpoint. So I mean, this is actually pretty cool, because now what you can do is you can find. So this is what I set. I set group results by year. I talked about, the United States, all categories, just 15 to 19 years. Now you can set it 5-year groups, 10-year groups, all genders, all races, all origins. Then I can set all the years. I can even say what weekday. I can get to the point where I can show weekdays and how many deaths there were as a result of that. And you can see I set all these areas: assault by handgun, assault by rifle, shotgun, larger firearms, assault by other and unspecified firearm discharge. So it was only assault. That's all I did. I didn't do anything else from the standpoint of guns and gun violence, and then basically show totals. And that's it. I mean, it's not. And then what happens is that you can get your charts, you can get everything else from that, and you can pretty much do your analysis from that standpoint. So it's really, really nice, really, really nice from being able to do that. And CDC has a lot of tools like that. I highly, highly recommend that that's what you use to be able to do what needs to be done in these areas. We'll go more into that in future shows. But the bottom line is, and let me say again that gun violence is reprehensible in any shape or form. And the bottom line is this: is that this is just talking about how to better parse the data so that you can understand what's going on. You can even go by regions. You can go by different regions and states and anything that you want from that. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can do with this. So I absolutely, absolutely recommend the CDC Wonder tool. Fantastic Wonder tool. And you can export it. What I did, I exported it to Excel, and then I used it in Excel. And that will definitely help you with being able to figure out this data and figuring out the forecasting aspect on it all. So on the lighter side, to end up the show, I wanted to tell you about my new book. It's called A Data Analyst Walks into a Bar Graph. It is about the funny side of data. And I've had a couple of shows on this, but I'm going to continue this type of thing. It's on lulu.com. Put a data analyst walks into a bar graph, and it will come up with a book. Please, if you're interested in anything like this, I absolutely recommend the book. Of course, I wrote it, but take a look at it. Give me comments on it. If there's a problem, whatever else, please let me know. I think that's important to have feedback on a book. It's also available on Amazon. Now, tell you, I'm not sure about the Amazon thing because there may be some issues with pricing there, but I'm okay. They're just going to have to figure that one out, I think. But lulu.com, and they have it. And I'm going to show you a picture of it so that you know what it looks like. I have the cover and everything, but basically what we're going to do is just show you how to get it. It's really, really easy. Basically what you do is you have Lulu here. You're going to see all the different things you have here. You have the menu. You have bulk ordering products, educational resources, guides, and then I'll have bookstore. And just go to the bookstore and then write data analyst walks into a bar graph. And it'll come up, and boom, there it is. There's the book here. And please, take a look at it, see what you think. It's not all that much, but it's enough. If you don't want to go to Lulu, you go to Amazon, Amazon.com, and what that'll do is that you can put in a data analyst walks into a bar graph, and that'll come up there too. And that's it right here. So, you can take a look. Here's your paperback cost, and you can take a look and see, what you think. So I'm trying. There's also an ebook out on this. I will. I don't know why that doesn't show there, but I'll take a look and see what's going on with that. So on that, I would like to just say thank you so much for listening. Please try to parse, the emotion from the whole thing, because I know, and take a look at the data yourself. Always, always, always take a look at it yourself. And I think that that will help you to make better sense of what the media is talking about and what's going on in the media through looking at the data involved. So for the Data Show, this is your host, Chris Greco, signing off. And thank you so much for watching. And remember, always, 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 please check the data. Have a great day.